Okay, we're here for our final chapter, chapter 28, September 11th, in the next American century. Here we see the image of one of the Twin Towers being hit by one of the planes that was hijacked on that horrible day. So the war on terrorism with Osama bin Laden really began in the early 90s. Bin Laden was upset with American influence in his home country, Saudi Arabia, and he's going to attack the United States in '93. The first Twin Tower was attacked with a car bomb in a parking garage. Later attacks were carried out on an American embassy as well as the USS Cole in the Persian Gulf. But September 11, 2001 was one of the saddest days in American history. 19 Al Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 planes. 2 of them hit the Twin Towers, a third hit the Pentagon, and the fourth, the passengers overpowered the terrorists on board. They were on their way to Washington, D.C., and it crash landed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. In total, that day, 3,000 Americans were killed, and the war on terror began. So, the Bush Doctrine, President Bush declared that America would not distinguish between terrorists and the governments that harbored them. And the terrorists were trained in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden was hiding out there, and America's going to go to war in October of 2001. So this was called Operation Enduring Freedom, and the goal was to not only take out bin Laden, but also the Taliban, which had taken control of the country. 2002, George Bush gave his famous Axis of Evil speech, where he accused Iraq, Iran, and North Korea of harboring terrorists and developing weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, or biological. Although no evidence connected them to 9/11, Bush was concerned with possible terrorism in the future. So this new policy of a preemptive war, where if America believed a country could be a future threat to security, then they had the right to attack before the threat materialized. And that's going to become a big issue in 2003 with Iraq. So Saddam Hussein, America fought in the first Gulf War back in 1990 and 91. Hussein was allowed to stay in power. But the Bush administration believed that Saddam was developing weapons of mass destruction, and the Bush administration was determined to remove him from power. So the strategy was massive airstrikes, followed by a ground invasion. And they believed that Iraqis would welcome America as liberators and soon after establish a democratic government. Most of Bush's administration was on board. Secretary of State Colin Powell believed that other countries should be utilized and hundreds of thousands of troops would be necessary. Congress authorized the use of force under the belief that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Although none were found there officially in the 2000s, later evidence points that there might have been weapons of mass destruction, so it's still debated today. But the Iraq War, while it was happening, was incredibly unpopular, similar to Vietnam. Many people felt a war against a nation that could be a security threat violated international law. Bush called the war Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Hussein's government will quickly fall to U.S. forces. Saddam was captured, put on trial, and executed in 2006. Bush regretfully is going to announce mission accomplished after the major combat was over with Baghdad falling, but an insurgency developed that dragged the war on for years and years. So American soldiers were targeted, as well as Iraqis who cooperated with America, and the country basically fell apart. Sectarian violence ensued between the Shiite and Sunni Muslims, and then Iraq is going to become what it was not before the invasion, a haven for terrorists bent on attacking Americans. So now today, in 2016, ISIS has developed, and they control parts of Iraq as well as neighboring Syria. The war was incredibly expensive and deadly. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis were killed, 3,000 Americans died, and 20,000 were injured. Here's Bush aboard the aircraft carrier with his mission accomplished sign in the back. So as I stated before, Iraq and Syria is now the center of terrorist struggles with ISIS, and components of Al Qaeda can still be found throughout the region as well. After September 11th at home, many questions about security and liberty. Congress quickly passed the USA Patriot Act, and most congressmen later admitted they didn't even read it. It was too big. And that gave unprecedented powers to law enforcement officials to monitor domestic terrorism. So they were allowed to wiretap, spy, open and read communications, obtain personal records without permission. And a detention camp was created at Guantanamo Bay for accused terrorists. And the Justice Department declared citizens could be detained without any formal charges or the presence of a lawyer if they were deemed to be a terrorist. Big controversy erupted over the use of torture. Bush administration ignored the Geneva Convention Against Torture, saying that the rules did not apply to captured members of Al-Qaeda. U.S. personnel in Afghanistan and Iraq, particularly Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, abused prisoners. Some prisoners even died because of the torture, and they took photographs. And when these photos were released, it was an embarrassment to the Bush administration. And documents released in 2008 indicated torture was approved at the highest levels of government. So Bush will be reelected in 2004. He's going to defeat John Kerry. And part of that was the fear of changing administrations in the middle of two wars. Also, no terrorist attacks had occurred on American soil since September 11th, so that was beneficial to Bush's reelection. Meanwhile, America's economy was on the verge of collapse with the housing bubble crisis. In 2008, low interest rates had been utilized, enabling Americans to borrow money to buy homes, and banks were willing to give out loans to or mortgages to people even if they didn't have the means to pay them. Subprime mortgages were given out, which were risky because they could double or triple the monthly mortgage payment. And the Federal Reserve Bank did nothing to slow this speculative frenzy. Similar to the 1920s, it's going to usher in a terrible recession, which known as the Great Recession. Home prices began to fall. Homeowners started defaulting on their loans. Banks found themselves with billions of worthless investments, ushering in a stock market collapse, huge unemployment, and a long-running recession that the country is still impacted by. The government had to bail out the banks with taxpayer money to the tune of $700 billion, and then there was outrage when $20 billion of that went to bonuses to pay top executives on Wall Street and within the banking industry, and little of that money was used to provide jobs. 2008, George Bush's 2 terms were up, and historic moment, Senator Barack Obama, the first African-American president, was elected, won decisively over John McCain, Arizona senator and Vietnam War veteran. And Obama is going to promise change, big change from the Bush administration. Bush's administration was very conservative, and Obama promised a foreign policy based on diplomacy, spoke of a need to fight income equality, and his big push in his first term was access to health care. Obama will be elected to 2 terms, also re-elected in 2012, and as we mentioned earlier, presidency dominated by the fight against ISIS and also the struggle to improve America's economy. There is President Obama with his family, and this is going to conclude the Chapter 28 video.